Today, we're going to build a full stack application using Prisma here, also using Supabase, and then we are going to use Next.js as well as Tailwind CSS to build this out. Now, this application in particular, it's going to be a pretty basic to-do application. I know it's completely cliche to build a to-do application, but I am going to focus a little bit more on how to use Prisma alongside Supabase, as I've made full stack tutorials in the past on using Supabase, and several people have commented, hey, can I use this with Prisma? Well, the answer is yes, and in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in somewhat of a demo application, but it is going to be a full stack application. But if you wanted it to be like a personal project, I think I'm going to provide a really good foundation for a Prisma, Supabase, Next.js, Tailwind CSS app. And then from there, you can extend it to do some other cool things. So as always, the final code is going to be linked down below. And yeah, let's get started here. So the first thing that we're going to do here is actually going to be within Supabase. And you can see I already built this project out once. Just make sure I can make this tutorial side of things a little bit smoother. But what we're going to do here is that supabase.com/dashboard. Go ahead and go there. If you haven't created a Supabase account, go ahead and create one. I believe it's 100% free, and I don't think you have to put in any credit card information, but it should be 100% free. So once you do that, go to /dashboard, and then we can click on new project, and I'm going to click my organization. I'm going to call this Prisma Supabase to do. And then from there, I'm going to type in a strong password. Now, this is going to be important here later on. So whatever you type in here, make sure you remember it, maybe write it down, maybe copy and paste it into like a notes editor or something like that. But make sure you remember this because it will be important later on. But I'm going to delete this project after this tutorial just so I can show you guys everything without worrying about like security stuff. So the password I'm going to use here, I'm going to go ahead and share it with you and let you know what I'm going to use. It's going to be Supabase 123 $! However, the S and B in Supabase are going to be capitalized. So it's going to be capital S and then UPA, capital B, and then ACE 123, and then $! Supabase 123 $! With the S and B of Supabase are going to be capitalized. So if you want to do everything like I'm doing, that's what my password is going to be. And I'm going to actually copy it to my clipboard right now and then click create new project. So while this is creating here, let's head over to VS Code. And what I want to do is run npx create next app at latest. And then this is going to be called Supabase Prisma to do. Not going to use TypeScript, no ESLint. We are going to use Tailwind. We are not going to use an SRC, and we are going to use the app router, and we are not going to customize the default import alias. So once this is all created here, I'm going to go up in the top left and go File, Open, and then open this project within VS Code. So I've opened up this project here. Now, what I'm going to do here at the start, just so I don't lose my password, is within my page.js file, I'm going to just say const pass is equal to, and then type in my password. And now you can see it's Supabase 123 $! That's just so I don't lose it. We will use this later on, but we've just generated this template Next.js application. If you've watched my videos before, you're probably pretty familiar with this, but if not, this is basically just going to give us a template app here to where page.js here is going to be the root of our application. I'm going to rename this to JSX so I get better code completion. And then there's actually one other thing I want to do here, and that is going to be adding a prettier RC file. Now, you do not need to do this. And depending on how you have VS Code set up, this might not 100% work. If you want to know how to set up prettier within the Next.js application, I think the previous video I did was on just that. So that's how I have mine set up. But just so I have better code formatting for you guys and nothing looks super gross, I'm just going to add a .prettier RC file to the root of my application. And then I'm just going to paste in a config that I always use for this. So you by no means have to use this or need to do this step. This is just so my formatting looks a little bit better here for you. So you'll see that when I save this, say I forget an exclamation point, it's going to add it. Say I have some extra spaces here, I do Command S, it's going to remove those. But I also have my VS Code set up to format on save and stuff. So you absolutely don't need that, but if you want it, go ahead and watch my previous video for it. Now we have our Next.js application, and it looks like our Supabase project is all done here. So now what we need to do here is let's head back to VS Code, open up our terminal, and let's run npm install at Prisma /client. So we're installing the Prisma client, and then run npx Prisma init, and this will get Prisma initialized here within our application. And then after doing that, you see we added a folder called Prisma, and now we have a schema.prisma. And this is where we are going to add our schema for our project, for our database. And we'll be able to see this reflected in Supabase if we do everything correctly here. What we need to do is go to this .env file that it added for us as well, and we need to add our database URL here. So this is just an example one, but what we need to do is within Supabase here, we need to go to, I believe it is at project settings, database, and then your connection string. This should be set on URL here. And then we want to copy this URL right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, head back to this project, paste it within the quotes. And then as you can see, we need to put in our password here. So I'm going to head back to my page.jsx. I'm going to copy this password. This is whatever password you typed in for your database password when creating your Supabase project. And then here, I'm going to remove the square brackets, delete that, and then paste in my password. So it should be your :password at AWS, and then whatever pool you used, so on and so forth. All right, so this is in your .env file, and it should be set at database password. And then also, I believe our env file is in our git ignore, but just to make sure, I'm going to add .env here to this .ignore file so we don't push it up to GitHub following this project, in case you want to push it to GitHub as you're working on this. So with that, now we need to update this schema a little bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete all this because we don't need it. And I'm definitely a fan of cleaning up unnecessary comments and stuff. So our provider here that it generated for us is correct. We want to do the Prisma client JS. Our database DB is going to be provider as Postgres SQL. Our URL is indeed going to be database URL within our env file right here. So that looks good. And then really we just need to add a model. So below database data source DB, go ahead and add model. And ours is going to be to do. So this is going to be a model that represents each to do within our application. And it's going to be super straightforward. It's just going to be ID is going to be an int, and it's going to be at ID at default parentheses auto increment, and then call that. So this is going to set a ID as a default, and it's just going to auto increment these IDs. And then we're just going to have a title, which is going to be a string. And that is all that we're going to do. Now that we've created this, and in our .env file, we set our database URL. So that should theoretically be our connection to Supabase. What we can do now is run npx prisma migrate dev -- name. And this is just going to be our initial model. So I'm just going to say init. So it's going to create a new Prisma migration with the name of init. And then we're going to run that. And as you can see, it says database DB, Postgres database. And then it should find like your database right here. And then it's applying this migration. And then it says your database is now in sync with your schema. So this is like the structure of our database. So now we should be able to go to Supabase, and we should actually be able to see, if we go over to database, we should now see this to-do table that we just added. And if we click on columns, we should see ID as well as title. So in previous projects, I would use the SQL editor here in Supabase to add tables and to add policies and stuff like that. But here, we're doing that all within the Prisma ORM here. So we set this Prisma schema. We could add, anything that you do in Prisma, you could also do it here and just kind of handle your database, your migrations, all that stuff kind of through Prisma, and then still have this Supabase layer to where you can visualize your table and still get the benefits of Supabase, to where you could use Supabase for authentication and all that stuff that Supabase gives you, but we're still using the Prisma ORM with it. I don't know if I necessarily like using the Prisma ORM with Supabase more. I think if you already are used to Prisma and you really like Prisma and some of the features it offers, then great. You can use it with Supabase, but you can also use a lot of the Supabase like client and helper functions and stuff like that as well. So I wouldn't say it's necessary to use Prisma with Supabase by any means, but you definitely can do it as you're seeing here. So to continue this, now we want to add some of our UI that is actually going to allow for us to interact with Supabase here. So let's come back here to start setting up like our UI, as well as we're going to use server actions to, and I can delete my password here from my homepage. What we want to do here at the top is we're going to say const Prisma is equal to Prisma client, and then call that function. And I believe we already did this, but just to make sure, go ahead and run npx Prisma generate. I believe when we did our Prisma init, this was already handled, but just make sure that you run that, just to make sure that you're not getting any weird stuff here. But we're going to start using this Prisma client, which is why I wanted to run that. So here at the top of this homepage, we want to first, we're going to want to get our to-dos from our database using Prisma. And then we're going to want to map over those to-dos to show them. But we're also going to want to add server actions so a user can add and delete to-dos from the page. So at the top, we're going to say const to-dos is equal to await Prisma dot to do. So the name of our table dot find mini. So that's basically saying, hey, get all of our to-dos from our database, and make sure to make this an async function so our await here makes sense. And then once we have that in place, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove all of this. So between our main tags, I'm going to remove all that. I'm also going to remove this class name. We will add styles here in just a second. But for now, let's just focus on kind of the templating out this page. So let's do an H1 that just says to-do list. And then below that, this is where we're going to add a form so they can add to-dos. So this is going to be a form. The action is eventually going to be add to-do, but we still need to add that server component here. And then we also want to add an input here. this is going to be type text, and this input is going to be for the title of our to-do. So let's do name is equal to title, type of text, and then we can also do placeholder. This can be add a new to-do. And you can see when I save, it's just formatting this based on my prettier config here. So this is really all we need for our input here. But now we want a button that is going to be of type submit. And then this button is going to say add to do. You can see it automatically formatted that up to one line here for us as well. And then from here, we want to render out a list of our to-dos. And you could, of course, do this in different components. I think that would totally make sense to do as well. But just to keep this simple and kind of focus more on the integration with Prisma with Supabase, let's just go ahead and add this to the same page here. So let's do a UL here. And then we're going to open up curly braces to enter JavaScript land. And then we're going to do to-dos dot map except a to-do arrow, not equal question mark, arrow. And then we're going to do a list item in which the key is going to be equal to to-do.id. And then within that list item, we are going to actually render out a span that has the to-do.title within it. And then below that span or below that title, we're going to render out another form where this action is going to be delete to do. And we'll create this function in just a second. And then we're going to do a button within our form that is going to be type is equal to submit. And this is just going to say delete. We're rendering this form so we can use a server action here. We could do this in some different ways as well, but we're just going to render out a form with a button within it. So we can call this server action to delete a to-do, but we're also going to need the ID of the to-do. So kind of a solution for this is rendering out a hidden input. So we're going to do an input to where type is going to be hidden, but then we're going to get the name is going to be ID and the value is going to be our to-do.id. So what this is basically doing is it's saying that when we call this delete to do action, we're going to be able to do form data.get ID, and that's going to be our to-do ID. So that's kind of one way we could do this. We could also bind the ID to this action, but I think that this approach is actually just a little bit easier. So now that this is in place, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the Tailwind CSS styles. You can, of course, do your own styling here, but I'm going to just use these from my GitHub. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste those, but you can do whatever you want with your styling. So that's pasted in here, but just a couple of things here. So for add to do here, make sure this is a string so it doesn't throw any errors. And same for this delete to do action as well, since we haven't created those yet. And I can also delete this image above. But this should be our home page. Let's go ahead and in our terminal, go ahead and run npm run dev. And let's go ahead and see how this actually looks. And then if I navigate to localhost 3000, we can see class constructor cannot be invoked without new, because I forgot, and I see this in my console here as well, I forgot to do this right here. So now we should see our page, which we do. So cool. Nothing apart from that error is broken. So we see our incredibly thoughtfully styled page here and a very complex to-do application. So with that, two more steps that we really need to take here. So that's basically adding these server actions to make sure that we can add, delete, and make sure that we're retrieving our to-dos after we add them. So what I'm going to do here is do a new folder. This is going to be actions. And then within my actions folder, let's go ahead and do add to-do.js. So for actions, I tend to like to add a actions folder for them, just so I know where kind of all my actions are, but really you don't need to put your actions in an action folder necessarily. You can even inline them within certain components, but we're going to just say use server here at the top because these are server actions. And then here below use server, we're going to say const Prisma is equal to new Prisma client. And then we need to make sure to import the Prisma client from @Prisma client. And I could probably do some more shared code here, but I'm not focused on a ton of that stuff right now. So let's go ahead and do export default async function add to do, which is going to accept form data. And then we're going to say const title is equal to form data dot get title. And the reason we're going to have access to this is because this add to do form here is going to have an input that has a name of title. So we're going to be able to get that. And I also realized that I have an ID of title here. I think I added that after the fact. You really don't need that, and that should be fine. But since we have an input with a name of title, we can go ahead and use form data.get title, and that should give us the title. And then from there, we can do try await Prisma dot to do dot create, call that, pass it an object in which the data property is going to be set to an object where title is going to be equal to title. But using JavaScript shorthand, we can just do title. And then we can also, for now, let's just catch the error and console.error the error. For security best practices, if you had like an authenticated application right now, you would want to add some security checks right here to make sure that an authenticated user is updating, adding, deleting to-dos and all that stuff. But for the sake of this application, we're not adding auth. We're just kind of getting Prisma set up with Supabase. But I do have several videos on adding authentication, which really isn't going to change much here. This code is going to allow us to create a new to-do here. Now, there's something else that we're going to want to add here. Maybe you already know what we're going to need to add here, but for now, let's just keep it how it is. And then let's go back to our actions. Now let's create our delete to-do.js file within our actions folder. And this is actually going to be pretty similar. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy the top 3 lines here, paste them, and then we're going to do export default async function delete to do. That's going to accept form data. And then we're going to say const ID is equal to form data.get ID. This should actually be form data.get ID. So we're going to have this ID here because, as I mentioned before, we have this hidden input that has a name of ID. So that is going to give us this ID here. But this ID is going to be a string, and Prisma needs it to be a integer. So what we need to do is convert this using parse int, a built-in function in JavaScript, and we can convert that string to an integer here. And then now we can do similar code. So try await Prisma dot to do dot delete, pass in an object. And then we need to set a where property. So this is like, what to do we want to delete? And then it's going to be the to do where the ID is equal to ID. So we can just use JavaScript shorthand and put in ID. And then we can also catch the error and then console.error the error, just like we did earlier. And of course, you can do better error handling. You'll want to do like actual security checks right here to make sure an authenticated user is deleting to-dos if we had that, but this will still give you the gist of using Prisma with Supabase. Now that we have this in place, I want to go ahead and instead of just the string add to do, this should be our add to do function from our actions. And then same thing with our delete to do. And this is our delete to do function from our actions here. Let me refresh this for good measure. And let's go ahead and add to do 1. And then if I click add to do, nothing happens here, but I would expect that at this point. So let me try to refresh. And when I refresh, I see the to do. So what happened here is something that you're definitely going to come to find with server actions is that since like we're not doing this client side, this is all server code here. We did not use client anywhere here within Next.js, meaning these are all server components, and we're using server actions here. What that means is that we added this to our database, but we didn't update our UI. So to update our UI, we need to call a function called revalidate path, and you could also use revalidate tag, but we're going to import revalidate path from next cache, and then we need to pass the path name we want to revalidate. In our case, it's going to be our home page. So here, let's try this again. I'm going to refresh to do 2, click add to do, and we see it right away. And then I can do to do 3, add to do, and we see it right away. And then if we go to Prisma here, and if I look at my table editor here and I look at to do, we see I have my 3 rows of to do 1, 2, and 3. So we are successfully adding these to our database. And we're seeing these in Supabase here. So if I add to do 4 and I click add to do, I see it here, come back to Supabase, and we see it populated here with to do 4. Now, if I come back and I try to delete to do 2, we don't see it updated in my UI, but you should see, if we didn't mess anything up here, and I refresh my database, we should have seen it disappear. But clearly, I think we have something wrong here within our logic here. And if I refresh this page, I still see to do 2. So it's not a revalidation thing. It means I actually messed up the logic when it came to delete to do. Okay, so what I think we need to do here, if you ever see like this error, can't reach database server at AWS, whatever, one quick solution for this I found is just rerunning npm run dev. I'm not sure why this timeout is occurring like it is sometimes. I've been running into this a little bit as well. So if you're running into that, just restart your local server. Like if you do Control-C to kill your server here and then run npm run dev, we should be able to refresh our page here. We should see everything. If I tried to delete to do number 2, I see that it is now deleted within Supabase. I don't see it here though. So we still need to, within delete to do, we need to make sure to revalidate path here again, like so. And then if I refresh and I delete, you can see, we see it right away. And then we can see to do 1 and it's added to the page. So if you get that error that your server isn't reached, just restart your dev server. There's definitely more things that we could do to get around that issue and make sure it doesn't like kind of time out like it is doing there. I would need to look into that a little bit further. But if you run into that while just kind of learning how to integrate Supabase as well as Prisma, then restarting that server is a good kind of easy way to keep developing and kind of get around that. That, my friends, is how to integrate Prisma with Supabase. Here we added a table using Prisma, and we're seeing it here within Supabase. We can see our to-dos. We can see that we've added our Prisma schema here. We're using Prisma to add and delete to-dos with server actions. And like we technically have a full stack application here. I know it's nothing crazy, but I really didn't want this video to be anything crazy. I really just wanted to perform like basic CRUD on a database using Prisma alongside Supabase. So if you liked this tutorial and you want to see more like Prisma Supabase tutorials and you'd like to see like a full-on application to where we add authentication, maybe some more pages, and maybe some more complex logic with more tables, we can absolutely do that. We have all the building blocks in place right now to build those larger applications. So if you want to see that, let me know. but I just wanted this to be a little bit of a quicker video, to be a little bit more of like a quick start of using Prisma with Supabase. And now that you know what you know from this video, you can definitely go and create those larger applications now that you know kind of how the mechanics work of it. So thanks for tuning into this. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in that next one.